بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well, and I'm very honored and happy to be here with you guys. And really, just kind of humbled by some of the words that Imam Tarif shared. I hope that some of them end up being true, inshallah, at some point in my life. But khair, inshallah, I'm happy to be here with you guys, and like Imam Tarif mentioned, we're just less than a week almost, or a week out from the month of Ramadan, and so it's a prime opportunity for us to kind of reflect on some of the footsteps and some of the path forward that we want to set for ourselves leading into the month of Ramadan. One thing that I've been thinking a lot about recently, especially as we prepare for the month of Ramadan, is this concept of, or it's a question really, and that question, I'd like for us to all kind of pose to ourselves, and really think deeply about it. And that question is, what has Islam saved you from? What has Islam saved you from? It's an important question, right? It's an important question. And oftentimes when we think about our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also when we think about Ramadan in specific, we tend to think about things that we want to add on to our lives. We tend to think with Ramadan in specific, we tend to think about maybe some of the additional Quran reading we want to do, or some of the additional salahs we want to pray, or some of the additional dhikr we want to make, or some of the additional charity we want to give. And without doubt, these are all things that are of utmost importance, right? Incredibly important. And actually, we find this in the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and of our righteous predecessors and the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that when Ramadan rolled around, they would increase in their recitation of Quran, and they would increase in their charity. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was described as the most generous of all people. Kana Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam ajwad an-nas. وَكَانَ أَجْوَدُ مَا يَكُونُ فِي رَمَضَانَ, right? The hadith mentions that he was even the most generous that he was. So he was already the most generous of all people, but with regards to his own generosity, he was the most generous in Ramadan, right? He was described as الريح المرسلة, like the wind that basically graces everyone in its path, right? Not a person that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam would pass by or interact with or be in the same vicinity as, except that they benefited from his generosity and his mercy, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So without doubt, adding additional things to our lives in Ramadan, adding additional deeds that we want to use to gain closeness, proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is without question something that we should be thinking about. But I think a step prior is thinking about what Islam has saved us from, and what we want in Ramadan specifically to rid ourselves of, right? To rid ourselves of. I often think about the narration of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, or that mentions Ja'far ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, who was the beloved of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his beloved cousin. And specifically the narration when the believers, the young Muslim community, is in Habasha, is in Abyssinia. So to give a little bit of background, in the early life of the Prophet ﷺ, in the early life of the Muslims, after the messages, after the Prophet ﷺ's prophethood, in that early Meccan period, the Muslims were enduring incredible hardship, incredible turmoil, incredible persecution and torture. And so in an effort to maintain the safety and the security of the young Muslim community, the Prophet ﷺ instructed a group of his companions to make a migration to Habasha, right? The first migration. And of this group, right, it was a significant number of people of this group. Amongst them was the Prophet ﷺ's own daughter and his own family, and Ja'far radiallahu anhu was the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. He was there as well. And as though their situation wasn't dire enough, the disbelievers in Mecca, in an attempt to kind of maintain this control, this grip over this young Muslim community, and this almost constant threat of fear and persecution, right? To maintain this grip, this chokehold that they had, or that they thought that they had on the believers, they didn't stop when this group left. So they sent, they sent ambassadors to Habasha to try and retrieve the Muslims and bring them back to Mecca so that they can continue to endure this persecution and be exposed to this hardship. So they sent two companions, or two ambassadors to Habasha. And to make the story short, what ends up happening is they come before the Najashi, the ruler who later becomes Muslim. And actually one of the ambassadors himself, Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, also later becomes Muslim. But they come before the Najashi bearing gifts, like some of his favorite things that he loved, trying to endear themselves before him. And they said, look, we've come before you, and we don't mean to disturb you or bother you, but just this group that has left Mecca and sought refuge here with you, they're actually a group of fugitives. And they are people who've caused, much incited much rebellion and caused much discord and basically threatened the fabric of our society, et cetera, et cetera. And now they've sought refuge here, right? They're fugitives, they're running from the law, in essence. And so let us take them off your hands and return them back, and bring them back, right? Allow us to take them back with us. Now the Prophet sent them to Najashi to begin with because he was a just ruler. And again, to kind of highlight and get to the point that I'm trying to get at here, in short, he summons the Muslims to his royal court to speak for themselves before making a decision. And when they're summoned, the Muslims then, that group of Muslims, they then appoint Ja'far radiallahu anhu as their spokesperson to say, look, you're going to answer on our behalf. And they all agreed that, look, we're not going to sugarcoat anything. We're going to speak exactly about what our beliefs are and why we're here and what we believe in and why we're following the Prophet ﷺ. And we're going to stick to that and put our trust in Allah. We're not going to try and make the situation seem, any sort of way to try and curry favor with the king. But when they're called, when Najashi summons the Muslims and asks Ja'far radiallahu anhu, what do you have to say about what they're accusing you of? He starts by mentioning what Islam has saved them from, why they're fighting so hard to maintain this faith. So he, radiallahu anhu, says, "Kunna qawman ahla jahiliyyah," that we were an ignorant, lost, wayward people. And he starts listing off the things that was characteristic of their society. نعبد الأصنام ونأكل الميتة ونسيء الجوار ويأكل القوي منا الضعيف. Like he starts listing off what their condition was. We were a people who were lost, we were ignorant, we were wayward. What we would do is we would, worship sticks and stones, inanimate objects. We would devote ourselves to these statues. And we would, we didn't have any concern about how we lived, what we ate. We would eat just dead meat. We would eat anything. We would harm our neighbors. وَنَقْطَعُ الْأَرْحَامِ. We would, cut off our family relationships. We came from broken homes. We had broken families, broken communities. We used to harm our neighbors. The strong amongst us in our society used to prey upon and take advantage of and oppress the weak. And so he says, we were in this condition, فَكُنَّا عَلَى ذَلِكَ حَتَّى بَعَثَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْنَا رَسُولًا. That until we were in this situation, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent forth for us a messenger whose background we knew well, whose reputation was cemented. Not somebody out the blue or out the random, but somebody we knew well. And what did he command us with? فأمرنا أن نعبد الله لا نشرك به شيئا وأن وأمرنا بالصلاة والزكاة وأمرنا أن نصل الرحم, etc., etc. Basically, he's saying, so we were in this situation. Allah sent us this messenger who told us that we should devote ourselves to God alone. and that we should be dutiful to our families, and that we should be kind to our neighbors, and that we should take care of the weak and take care of the oppressed, and and give charity, etc., etc., etc. Right? And the narration mentions, so he started to list off, or started to mention to him, the tenets of Islam. Okay. Now, again, this was early in the message of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's really interesting to highlight and think about what was his understanding of what Islam was. Right? What was his understanding of what Islam was? And why did he begin with talking about everything that Islam had saved them from? Right? The idea is that before you can beautify yourself, before you can before you can take something to the next level, before you can optimize something, or before you can make something as great as it can be, you first have to clean out anything that's holding it back. Right? The example is like, if you want to renovate a house, right? You don't renovate a house by by starting with changing the countertops. Right? You don't renovate a house by starting with adding paintings on the wall, or adding new furniture or anything like that. You renovate a house by first gutting the house, stripping the house, cleaning the house. Right? The example is, if like you want to wear, like, accessorize clothing that is stained, right? There's something more imperative first. And really, you're not going to accomplish the goal that you're actually setting out to accomplish until you get at something that's much more primary. And that is the idea of what you're removing first. Okay. The books of Islam that teach us about spirituality and purification always talk about the idea of the heart being a vessel. And before you can fill the heart, you have to empty the heart. Right? This idea of at-takhliya qabla at-tahliya, right? Removal before beautification, or before making something again beautiful, or making something better. And this concept is actually established in the Quran as well, and established in many places in the Quran and in the Sunnah. Okay, so even in our proclamation of faith, there is what's called a nafi qabla al-ithbat. Nafi is negation, and ithbat is affirmation. So before you affirm anything, you first have to denounce everything else. Okay? Before knowing who you are, you have to know who you're not. And so we say, La ilaha illallah. We start with, there is no God. There is no deity. There's no object of devotion. There's nothing to which I will direct, or there is nothing worthy of me directing any energy, focus, love, fear, dedication, devotion to whatsoever, except Allah. Illallah. Right? When we look at the Quran itself, for example, we find قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ comes before قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. And what is قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ? It is a proclamation. I do not believe what you believe. And then there is قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. What do I believe? In Allah, the one, right? The unification, or the tawheed, the oneness of Allah. Okay. Actually, in one of my favorite examples of this is actually in Surah Al-Baqarah, after Ayatul Kursi. So Ayatul Kursi is what we understand from the Prophet ﷺ to be the greatest ayah in the Quran. And in it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of his majesty and his greatness, right? And how exalted and majestic he is, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then right after that ayah, the next ayah that comes is La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. There is no ikrah is to force someone to do something that they don't want to do. Right? And this is a statement of fact. You cannot force somebody to be a certain way that they have no interest in being, right? You can't force somebody to believe or to adopt or to embody something that doesn't settle in their heart. You can force them to to deal with the external forms of something to an extent, but even that, you can't really uphold that, right? A common example even from American history is when you think about the idea of prohibition, right? Prohibition was, early 1900 effort by the US government to ban alcohol. And you can even think about it today with many different laws, but prohibition in specific, the effort to ban alcohol is so unsuccessful because from the top down there's laws and there's penalties against it and whatever, but then you have the entire system of bootlegging that becomes like popular, right? And the whole idea of like developing moonshine and all this other stuff, it's like people just circumvent it, find some other way, right? There is no internal acceptance of this as a value. Okay, so after Ayatul Kursi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, La ikraha fi din. It's like as though to say, as after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of himself in such exalted terms, or in such a magnificent way, it's as though to say, like, this is how majestic and how incredible a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is and can be. But at the end of the day, it's up to you. La ikraha fi din. قد تبين الرشد من الغي. What has been upright and what is clear and what is direct and what is right has been made plain, has been made clear from that which is confusing and and shaky and faulty and and wrong. قد تبين الرشد من الغي. فمن يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى. And this is a part I wanted to highlight. Allah says, whoever disavows or disbelieves or loses faith in every form of evil and rebellion and opposition to Allah, to opposition to God, ويؤمن بالله, and believes and puts their faith and their hope and their trust in God, فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى, then this person has held on to the most firm and solid handhold that they could hold on to, right? Something that will never falter. They have held on to something that will never let them down. العروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها. There is no, it's sound, right? There is no flaw in it. There is no gap in it. There's no weakness in it. But the sequence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lays out is فَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ. Whoever loses faith in everything else and believes in Allah. Now, again, these are like, they can be esoteric concepts, nebulous ideas. But the question that each of us needs to answer for ourselves is what are those things that we have faith in, that we have trust in, that we have hope in, that we love, that we fear losing in such a way that those emotions should only be reserved for God? What are these dependencies and what are these, what is this, like, whatever I medicate myself with? And I know that's a loaded term because it can have very grave implications. But in many different ways, we all treat ourselves, medicate ourselves with something. And we all have our maybe too much faith and hope and devotion and trust in something other than Allah, right? That thing could be our own smarts, our own intellect, our own ingenuity. It could be it could be a relationship. It could be a destructive habit, a destructive tendency. It could be a problematic cycle, whatever it is. It can be any number of these things, or a combination of them. And perhaps that thing is getting in the way of us truly developing and relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we should. فَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ. Right? So when we think about our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and as we think about entering into this blessed month of Ramadan, which we should have a plan for, right? If you don't have a plan, the saying goes, those who fail to plan to fail, right? We should think about those things that we want to rid ourselves of, those things in our life that don't serve us. And for many of us, maybe these things are attachments that we've battled for years or for the majority of our lives. And maybe there are things that the idea of a life without them scares us. The idea of a life where we don't have these things, these crutches, these attachments scares us. We can't think of our lives without these things. But until we learn how to let go and dedicate that emotional space to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, then we'll find that we fall into these cycles year after year where we, make a little progress, add a couple things here and there, and inevitably they either fall off or they lose their meaning or their value, or they just don't feel real or authentic, or we're not experiencing, the result or the benefit that we want to. We have to, there's a poem by, Rumi that says, and by the way, Rumi was a scholar of Islam and was very well versed in the sciences of the heart, right? And now, unfortunately, a lot of the things that the popular poems or the popular sayings that come from him are used to they lose focus of what he was trying to get at, which was a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he said that, your job is not to seek out love, but to seek out and remove all the barriers you have built against it. To seek out and remove all the barriers that you've built against it. And what are those obstacles that are standing between you and Allah? Right? What are those things that stand between you and Allah? That, in an honest effort, that's, again, just between you and Allah. To say, Ya Allah, I want to take my relationship with you seriously. And I want to stop putting band-aids on wounds. Right? I want to get at the core of the things that my heart is connected to. And I want them to be connected, or I want my heart to be connected to nothing other than you. So in being honest about that conversation with ourselves, what are the things that we need to get rid of? There is a great scholar that comes from Egypt, named Ibn Ata'illah. And Ibn Ata'illah has a number of what's translated in English as aphorisms, but they're statements that are intended to evoke reflection and speak about realities of developing a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and coming closer to him. And again, these are all based in the Quran and Sunnah, and it's important for us as as students and as people who are trying to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better, that we begin our journey with with just the fundamentals and the sacred sources that without question will never be exhausted. Okay, so it's not like I want to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so let me start reading Ibn Ata'illah, and let me start reading Imam Ghazali or whatever, and let me neglect the Quran, or let me neglect the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All right, so this is not what we're saying, but just something for us to take reflection from. He says, كيف يشرق قلب صور الأكوان منطبعة في مرآته. Right, this is like almost an answer to a question who's saying to a question of somebody who's asking, I've been trying and I've been trying and I've been trying, but I don't feel my heart opening to the remembrance of Allah. I don't feel my heart being moved to the remembrance of Allah. I don't feel like I'm growing closer in I don't feel a sense of sincerity or a sense of closeness or a sense of whatever. I don't feel that relationship is really there. And I'm wondering, why is my heart not opening up to this? He says, كيف يشرق قلب صور الأكوان منطبعة في مرآته. How can a heart be opened while the images of all creation are sullying its mirror, right? Are stained within that person's mirror. So the example given is like, if I'm looking at a mirror that has all my handprints on it and has all these smudge marks or whatever, how can I see through it clearly? So what he's saying is, how can your heart be open while your heart is stained or still has the impressions or the images or the stains of all of creation, al-akwan, anything other than Allah? How can that heart be opened? Right? How can that heart see clearly? How can light penetrate through that heart? أم كيف يرحل إلى الله وهو مكبل بشهواته? Or how can he make the journey towards God? Or how can he be free to journey towards God while he is being held down and shackled by his by his desires, by this person's desires, right? How can you journey towards God while it's almost like you're tied down with your desires, the things that your lower self wants, the things that you haven't found a way to lose faith in? Again, lose faith. I want to drive that point home, because it is a losing of faith. It is believing about those things something that you didn't believe before, or stopping or refraining from believing about these things something that you did believe, that they can actually help you, that they can cause you, or that they can give you some sort of satisfaction or give you some sort of tranquility or peace. One of the traps of shaitan is that when you try something and you don't find the relief that you're looking for from it, he tells you that it's not the thing that's wrong, it's the way you did it. You didn't do it enough, or you didn't do it hard enough, or you didn't try this way of doing it, or now you need to do it more. It's never that this thing is not the right thing for you. It's just that some other iteration of how you try to do it will bring you what you're looking for. And whether that thing is money, right? The trap is, well, it's not that money isn't there for you, you just don't have enough of it. Or it's that relationships, right? It's not that this relationship is not what's going to bring you peace, right? Because you have felt good before in it. It's that you haven't found the right one, or you haven't worked at it enough, or you haven't dealt with whatever enough. And not to say that relationships are not beautiful things, but to say that they're never gonna come close, or they're never gonna take the place of your relationship with Allah. So again, it's a losing of faith. So Ibn Ata'illah, he says, how can you journey to God while you're being held down by your desires? And then he says, let me pull up the exact quote. أم كيف يطمع أن يدخل حضرة الله وهو لم يتطهر من جنابة غفلاته? Or how could this person ever hope to come into the presence of God, to be in the presence of God? And we understand that in the hereafter, especially, the greatest joy that any soul can ever experience is being with Allah in a way that befits His Majesty, Azza wa Jal. So how can this person ever hope to enter into that sacred presence, that blessed gathering, or that blessed encounter, while this person hasn't purified themselves from the ills and the dirt of their heedlessness, right? How is it that you can expect to be with God when you're heedless, or when you are, God is not on your radar at all? It's like when we before we pray, we need to make wudu. We need to purify ourselves. And if we are in, a greater state of impurity, we need to, to bathe ourselves, right? So likewise, when we try to establish our relationship with Allah, in the physical sense, we should cleanse ourselves as well, right? We should make sure that we are doing the best that we can in terms of just being physically pure, being in the best state, right? If we can, wearing something nice, like really setting up our space. These are all things that can enhance our connection, our worship. But internally, right? How many times have I found myself in my salah while I'm supposed to be focused on connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but my mind is in 100 different places that have nothing to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or my relationship with him, right? It's almost as though we're saying, like, there's a narration that mentions that, when somebody's heart is distracted in salah, it's as though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to that person, ila ain, like, where are you going? To ila khayrun minni, like, is your focus or your attention turning towards anything that could possibly be better than me, right? So again, how do we expect to enter the presence of God or be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while we haven't cleansed ourselves from the dirt and the grime of our of all of our distractions? أم كيف يرجو أن يفهم دقائق الأسرار وهو لم يتب من هفواته? Or how can this person hope that they will understand or begin to see the nuances and the light and the secrets of closeness to God while they haven't repented for their mishaps and their errors and their shortcomings? There are people who we observe, and maybe we've seen them in our lives, and maybe we've seen them in our own communities or in our own houses or in our own experience, that it seems that they have such a deep understanding of God or deep understanding of Islam, or that they read an ayah and it causes them to cry, or they read a hadith and it causes them to to spend hours and hours or even days and weeks in reflection, or they just can't shake their mind, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned and their entire focus and attention and their mood shifts, or that there are people who are, you notice that they're constantly in the remembrance of God, or they constantly remind you of God, right? And you think about these people, they definitely understand something that I don't. Ibn Attallah is saying, how can you ever hope to understand these nuances, these secrets, these these gems of a relationship with Allah while you haven't repented for your shortcomings? So again, the idea of all this is that there are things that hold us back. And until we remove ourselves or rid ourselves or make the earnest and honest effort to remove these things from our heart. And again, by the way, this is a lifelong journey. All right, this is a lifelong journey. The heart is something that ultimately is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَحُولُ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَقَلْبِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran. Know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes between a person and their own heart. Right? The journey towards rectifying your heart can only go through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he tells us that the hearts are between two fingers within the hands of Allah, again, in a way that befits His Majesty Azza wa Jal. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turns them however He wishes. القلوب بين أصبعين من أصابع الرحمن يقلبها كيف يشاء أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. So again, we know that this process is not, we can't even begin to start this journey without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help. But know that if your attachment seems so overbearing, find comfort in the fact that you can't do this journey without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help. Meaning it's not on you. It's not totally and entirely on you alone. It's not your burden alone to carry. If Allah wanted, He could remove this thing from your heart without any difficulty. And what is the dua that the Prophet ﷺ used to make most, and something that we should make a lot on our own, and also as we think about the month of Ramadan, the dua is, Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinik. O turner, changer of hearts, O Allah, the turner, the changer of hearts, make my heart firm upon your way. Make my heart firm. So it's just a reminder to myself, and hopefully all of us together, that as we approach the month of Ramadan, and as we think about our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more broadly, what are those items within our baggage that we need to discard so that our journey can move, right? And you'll find, like the statement that we mentioned earlier goes, you'll find that once you remove the obstacles, the journey is actually much, much easier. Once you remove the obstacles, you find that progress that maybe you were taking years and years and years to make, you might make in a much shorter period of time. Because the thing that's been holding you back is not getting in your way anymore, right? And again, it's something that takes a long time. It takes a lifetime. It's something that we all work through every single day. And some days are better than others, right? Some days those things beckon us and call us back, or our heart is tempted, to be attached to something else. But it's a journey that's necessary to make. And at the end of the day, why is it that in the month of Ramadan we feel so uplifted, right? Why is it that we feel so uplifted in Ramadan? Because we hold ourselves back. We starve our nafs, we starve our lower selves so that our hearts can eat, so that our souls can live. We hear the sound of a caller within ourselves that's been speaking this whole time, but the interference was so loud that we often didn't hear it, or it was very faint. And once all that interference is removed, we can hear that call much more clearly and much more loudly. Ramadan itself is nothing more than imsak, right? Holding oneself back. And in the technical definition, of course, holding oneself back from food, drink, and marital relations, right? From dawn to dusk, right? From sunrise to sunset. But how many of us have found that when we starve our stomachs a little bit, we find that our hearts are more aware? When we hold ourselves back from certain things, we find that our taqwa, our awareness, our consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more present. And now when I look at a piece of food, it isn't like a reminder that, of something to satisfy or satiate my stomach, but it's a reminder of my commitment to Allah, because now I see a piece of food and I say, I'm fasting. And I'm forced to remember Allah, right? Or even beyond that, on a more spiritual level, holding ourselves back in our behavior, in our demeanor. The Prophet tells us in a hadith, "Man lam yada' qawla zuri wal 'amala bihi, falaysa lillahi hajatan fi an yada'a ta'amahu wa sharaba." Whoever doesn't abstain or hold themselves back or leave off, just pointless, useless speech, evil speech, stuff that brings only harm and no benefit. Wal 'amala bihi, and acting upon it. So now you're more conscious of what you say and how you act. فَلَيْسَ لِلَّهِ حَاجَةً فِي أَنْ يَدَعَ طَعَامَهُ وَشَرَابَهُ. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no need for this person to leave off their food and drink, because it's like, what are you accomplishing, right? And we're reminded by the Prophet ﷺ that if somebody tries to disturb your commitment or the tranquility of your fast while you're fasting, that you remind yourself and that person that you're fasting. Someone tries to engage with you in hostility or tries to, move you off your spot in any sort of way, right? Not obviously in a way that's justified. It's not like, your mom has been, reminding you for like 3 weeks now to clean your room and you're like, I'm fasting. It's not that, but it's somebody, who's trying to, again, like bring about something that has no benefit, or argue with you, or like, disturb your fast, and you remind yourself that I'm fasting. Why? I'm holding myself back. I'm not engaging in this. So that is all just to say that fasting in itself, in its essence, is nothing more than holding ourselves back. And because we do that, we find that the strides in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are monumental, right? In ways that we don't experience when we don't hold ourselves back. So these are just some brief thoughts and reflections. As we approach this month of Ramadan, we should consider those things that perhaps might stand between us and Allah, right? Um, and think about how we do away with these things, how we lose faith in them, right? And put our faith in Allah, how we lose trust in them and put our trust in Allah. And we don't need to look any further than the track record of our own lives to see how these things have not served us. You don't need to look any further than the disappointments you've encountered in your own life to see maybe where you put a lot of stock into something that shouldn't, have had that much stock into it. Right? How those things have let you down. And then we'll find that the things that we want to add are much more meaningful. We'll gain a lot more out of much less effort, right? We might read, maybe instead of reading a juz of Quran, we might read a page and find immense benefit. Not to say that we shouldn't push ourselves, obviously, do as much as you can. But the idea is that you'll feel like, just minimal effort gives you incredible dividends, right? Pays incredible dividends. So in summary, when we think about our commitment and our preparation for Ramadan, our connection, our commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? The things that, how we want to come closer to Him in this month and just in our lives more broadly, we should consider those things that are standing in the way and be very serious about removing them or properly contextualizing them at the very least, right? And that's a tall order. That's a tall task, and it's not easy. And it can engender a deep sense of isolation and loneliness at times. It can be a difficult journey. And that's why it's of utmost importance that we, that we don't do Ramadan in isolation, that we try as best as we can to do Ramadan in community, even if it's virtual at some level, right? Be the person that reaches out to others in Ramadan, that tries to connect with others, that still tries to, whether it's even virtual or in person in a safe way, does iftar with people, prays together with people, again, either not virtually, but in a safe way, like reflects with people, has conversations about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with people, reach out to others. Like, it's important that we are a community for one another, especially in these times. And we find that in those moments, we have a renewed sense of commitment to this journey of ours when we find others who are likewise committed in that endeavor. So we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this Ramadan one that's fruitful, and our relationship with Him one that that grows each and every single day until the day that we meet Him. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to experience what it means to have faith in Him and be connected to Him and love Him. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those that He loves and surround us with those who He loves and make His love the most beloved thing to us. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to, that Allah forgive us for our faults and our shortcomings and the lapses and the errors and the sins that we've committed in our lives that we don't even fully understand the ramifications of. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turn those into deeds that engender growth, that bring about reward, that bring about healing and connection, and not isolation and disconnection and punishment. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aid us and make us sincere in our effort towards Him. And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to experience community. And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heal those who are suffering, wherever they may be, whether their suffering is known to others or unknown to others, whether their suffering is external to themselves or internal to themselves. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate their pain and replace it with something much better. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heal those who are sick, have mercy on those who have passed, and make our paths towards him easy. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring us closer to our beloved sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Allow us to learn about him, love him, follow him, be like him, want to be with him. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to have a relationship and develop a relationship with the Quran, with his words, and that we turn to his words and we turn to him to answer the questions in our lives before we turn to anything else, and that we see everything else only as means to him, and not that we turn to Allah after we've exhausted every other thing and now we feel stuck. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people of charity, make us people who prefer others over ourselves. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people who of knowledge, people who know about him and about his deen and about his messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and people who act upon that knowledge. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not take us from this earth except that he is pleased with us.